but it'll be fine.
Hi guys, welcome to the Eight Limbs podcast. I'm your host Ryan Wagner. Since this is the first episode, I'll just give you guys a slight overview of what we're going to be doing here. My podcast is going to focus mostly on Muay Thai and kickboxing, but it's going to be a general striking podcast. So if there's anything interesting on the UFC card last week or anything in stand-up, I'll probably talk about that. For now, we're going to be focusing mostly on Muay Thai. I'm joined here with my esteemed guest, crackerjack boxing historian and the most prickliest man on Twitter, Kyle McLachlan.
How's it going, Ryan? Did you write that down? Did you do a little
I didn't, no.
script? Oh, okay.
That was off the cuff.
Not bad improvisation, man. How's it going?
I'm pretty good. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, not too bad. Been a pretty lazy Sunday. I don't know when this podcast will go out, but that might make it seem antiquated by the time it does. But I imagine it's going to be coming out relatively shortly after recording.
Yeah, that might age like milk.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't you give us a little rundown of what you're looking to achieve? I mean, from the podcast, not in general like you just have, but from this particular episode.
For the first episode, I want to give our listeners kind of an overview, an introduction to Muay Thai. Tell them about the metagame, explain scoring to them, and see if we can make them understand why Thiago Santos having a black belt in Muay Thai is not particularly meaningful.
Seems like a pretty easy job, unless you're, well, I was going to use the R word, but I'll just say unless you're stupid.
Yes. So let's start with the metagame and scoring. What is the main things that differentiate Muay Thai from MMA?
Obviously, it's a long-winded kind of story to explain to people, but in short term, in a kind of shorthand way, it's completely different to boxing and the MMA. If we're talking about Muay Thai, we're talking about real Muay Thai, right? Bangkok Muay Thai,
Yeah.
Thai
Stadium Muay Thai.
Actual stadium Muay Thai in Thailand. Well, you probably have to explain to people exactly what that is and how that works first.
Right.
Obviously, there's a lot of people out there that say they're Muay Thai and what have you, and the actual rule set of Muay Thai being, obviously elbows, knees, punches, kicks. That's not too hard to come by. But actual Bangkok Muay Thai, stadium Muay Thai, which what we'll call it from now on, is quite a peculiar beast. I mean, I'm not as well versed on the international scene to know how they score, but I'm pretty certain if you watch a Muay Thai fight in your hometown, however authentic it may look, they're probably going to score on a more basic 10-point must system. Whereas in Thailand,
in any kind of North American or European Muay Thai, it's essentially kickboxing. They score it round by round. They don't like have a hierarchy of techniques the way Muay Thai does. Like punches count the same as kicks. In Japan, my understanding is generally that they just score it for the Japanese fighter.
Well, that sounds about right. I mean, we tend to see, regardless of the striking discipline, that Japanese fighters tend to get favoured when they're on home soil, which is understandable. I'm a bit of a weeb, so I don't mind seeing that. When it comes to Thailand, though, it goes without saying that it's quite a peculiar, not just the way it's scored, but the way fights actually play out. That in terms of the agreement between fighters, or the loose agreement between fighters, shall we say, it's unwritten, a bit of an unwritten rule. You tend to see the first round, especially, as a feeling out round. There are exceptions to the rule, but generally the first and second rounds are building to a crescendo. And in the third and fourth rounds, in particular, the fourth round, are the most important rounds of the fight. That is when we see both guys really going at it, knowing that they felt each other out. They've tried each other's style out, and in the third round, they really will start fighting. And in the fourth round, it's generally accepted, and I say this is a general rule, not a hard and fast rule, but a general rule, that it's generally accepted that the winner of the fourth round would have won the fight, and thus in the fifth round we often see both guys dancing around, not doing much, and to a Western audience, it may seem very peculiar that maybe if a fighter has lost the 4th round big, why he desperately isn't trying to win in the 5th round. We do see exceptions to this, so I'm sure we'll touch on them later. But to the Western audience, thinking, why won't he go for a knockout? These guys are fighting usually every couple of weeks, at least once a month, and it's a rule essentially that you don't. If you've lost a fight in the 4th round, you tend to lose the fight. And also in Thailand, something which we'll probably go more into as this podcast goes on, it's one of the few places you can actually bet is in the Muay Thai stadiums. So if mainly the betting will rise between the 3rd and 4th round, and the big bets will come on. And generally, there's side bets being placed on. If you've actually been in the stadiums in Bangkok, like I have, it's not out of the question to see a gambler, offering advice or financial reward to a fighter in between rounds. Come on, you've got to win this round. I've just put a lot of money on you, that sort of thing. It's not as commonplace nowadays, but it definitely was. So it's just a loose rule that the winner of the 4th round will have won the fight, and that's why you'll tend to see both guys concede ground in the 5th round, dance around a bit, and generally everyone's just having a great time.
Yeah, it's always great for someone who isn't used to Muay Thai to see both fighters thinking they won the 4th and dancing off in the 5th. A lot of times you'll get foreign fighters who don't play by those rules and will go hard from the 1st round. And they usually, like you said, the 1st rounds aren't scored heavily. The judges usually give it 10-10. And again, Muay Thai isn't scored round by round. It's a holistic fight scoring system where the end of the fight, particularly the 3rd and 4th rounds, are prioritized above the rest. So you'll often see foreign fighters come in hot and then kind of decline as the fight goes on. And of course, they're a lot more likely to lose those fights.
Or likely to get blasted for being disrespectful and not having the skill set to even dare to compete on that level.
Yeah, that's true. So to reiterate what you were saying, we were talking about North American Muay Thai and Japanese Muay Thai. When you're training at a Muay Thai gym in North America, you'll most likely be getting you'll be in kickboxing with some elbows, knees, and a little bit of clinch. But Muay Thai as an overall sport has a much different meta. And the reason this meta has developed is because of a scoring system that's a lot different than anything we see in North America or Japan.
Yeah.
So the way Muay Thai is scored. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I do want to say quickly, Ryan, one thing I didn't mention, and I think you're about to go into it, of course, is you mentioned this earlier that you're probably about to go off on this tangent now, but I just want to jump in because I think it was important to my earlier point, is that in North America, gloved punches are scored just the same. Whereas obviously in Thailand,
yes,
it's deemed, that the harder part of the body, the bare shin and the knee and the elbow are seen as more dangerous and thus higher point scorers than gloved punches.
Right. So in Muay Thai, there's a hierarchy of techniques.
Someone might land a really sweet punching combination, and then his opponent might retort with a single kick to the body, and that single kick to the body will therefore have put that fighter further up in the judge's mind than someone who might have landed a really sweet, like, say, 3 or 4 punch combination.
Right. So kicks and knees to the body are scored the highest, or if you can get a kick or knee to the head, but you don't see those too often in high-level Muay Thai. Punches, like you said, are scored typically only if they have a visible effect on the opponent, if they clearly rock him or make him stumble. Elbows are scored highly, and other techniques like push kicks are, again, typically scored if they have a visible effect. But the highest scoring techniques are those kicks and knees to the body, and you'll usually see Thais trying to kick the open side, which is very high scoring. Now, there's a lot of confusion about the kind of narrative-based scoring of Muay Thai, where I've heard a lot of people say, like, you can't fight a Muay Thai fight going backwards. They're all super aggressive, and you have to stand your ground and not show, like, any kind of weakness by moving backwards. That's not true. There is a narrative element to scoring, but it doesn't work in such a simple way. you'll see fighters trying to sell a certain narrative. You'll get pressure guys like Muay Thai who will try to sell the narrative of like pressure and overwhelming force. They want to keep moving forward, keep their opponent on the back foot. And if you have a fighter who's like running away from a guy like Muay Thai, then it looks like Muay Thai is winning. He's in control. He's doing exactly what he wants. He's making you panic. He's pressuring. But equally, you'll have guys like Siam Chai and Litawada who will aim to sell the opposite narrative. Control through poise, composure, and slick outside fighting, where they're the ones on the outside, they're moving backwards, they're forcing their opponent to come forward, leading them onto counters, and dazzling with finesse. And there's a certain thing to the meta where often you'll see fighters, when they're winning or they think they're winning, they'll back up and make their opponent come forward. It's sort of an, I got mine, now the onus is on you to come take the fight back from me. So this idea that you need to move forward or you need to stand your ground is not true, but there is an element of kind of selling your story of the fight to the judges.
One thing we didn't mention in terms of the scoring as well is throws, tripping your guy, dumping him.
Yes.
Anything. Which you're saying is important to that as well, because Muay Thai scoring is very much based on control, and by that I don't necessarily mean general shit, getting in, getting out. It's more a case of whatever fight you're trying to fight. For example, if you do counter someone, that's important because it shows that you're in control. If you throw someone and you stay upright, it shows you're in control. If you're able to evade someone's attacks and fire back, it shows you're in control. It's better. Muay Thai rewards technical fighting essentially, and even I don't mean that in terms of in a boxing sense. If you think of someone who's a technician, you might think of someone who's a back foot fighter, but to your point, someone who's able to fight on the back foot not being penalised, you often find that even really aggressive fighters are very technical fighters, and here's the reason why, of course, that only the cream of the crop will get to Bangkok. There are guys from the poorest regions of Thailand in the south and in the northeast that are fighting each other from a young age, and only the best of the best get to fight on the higher stages. So by the time you get to Bangkok, even guys that are like what you would consider in boxing to be a brawler, they're going to be very well versed in the technique of Muay Thai and know how to take care of themselves. Because when you're fighting month by month, you need to be defensively responsible.
Right, and a lot of fights will look like to a Westerner who's not well versed in the style, and I was this way too before I really got into it. It looks like they almost aren't doing anything because they keep throwing kicks onto each other's legs, and in a lot of fights nobody really makes headway. But like you said, that's because they're so defensively sound. The primary scoring weapons are kicks and knees, and it is incredibly hard to land a clean kick or knee on a high level tie. And what you said about the control in regards to dumps and trips is absolutely true. Balance is a huge aspect of Muay Thai. If you can disturb your opponent's balance, knock them off balance, it scores very highly. So trips and throws are some of the most high-scoring weapons in Muay Thai.
If talking about aggressive fighters having very good defense, ties into our international fighters being well out of their depth, although I'm sure maybe not in this podcast, but a future podcast. I mean, you and I have spoken about this recently. The international fighters are getting closer. Maybe not in FTR, full-time rules against top ties, but they're getting there. If you look at the first Rodtang Haggerty fight, Rodtang, who's probably the most, he's probably the synonymous with the sort of berserker, warmonger style of Muay Thai nowadays.
Yeah.
He's a very action-packed, fan-friendly fighter, known as a non-stop aggressor. In the first fight, it was quite a closely contested back and forth fight. If you saw in the last fight, which happened just a couple of weeks ago, one championship, Rodtang looked like a defensive master as well as an offensive master, because Haggerty was so far out of his depth, and also because in a normal fight against a Thai or against a top international fighter, you'll see Rodtang, he is more sort of restrained in his outbursts.
He's more composed because he has to be.
Absolutely. Against Haggerty, he looked like he's having fun in there. I mean, he was pulling off the kind of defensive stuff you'd expect to see someone like Samat Pakaroon pull off in his
Yeah.
prime. It was absolutely incredible because he was so far. I mean, it's crazy to think after the first fight that Haggerty was so far below his level, because obviously he'd beaten Same, and he'd shown he'd be one of the best international guys in sort of full Thai rules in his first fight with Rodtang, kind of come out of nowhere. And in the second fight, it was just a whitewash, not just in terms of the shots that Haggerty was slipping, but in terms of what he couldn't do. And then you see, of course, that Rodtang, when he needs to be, or sorry, not when he needs to be, when he can be, he has as much technique and defensive ability as anybody else out there. Because as we were saying earlier, even
Right.
aggressive guys need to be skilled.
And that fight is a great example too, because Haggerty has a kind of Thai style. He does a lot of things you see from Thais. He has the light lead leg and active lead leg kicks. He has the stepping elbows, but he lacks a lot of the ancillary skills that elite Thais will use to prevent someone like Rodtang from just blowing them up. Like if you watch his fight with Runkit, Runkit was kicking the open side to halt Rodtang's advance. He was tying him up in the clinch whenever he got aggressive and turning him onto the ropes so he could get back into the center. He would feint and just land like little jabs to disturb Rodtang's rhythm so he could move out. And Haggerty was doing a lot of the things Thais do, but he didn't have the supporting skills that make it all work. So when he was throwing his teep, he would get it caught, and instead of doing what elite Thais would do and either re-teeping to move Rodtang back and get space or tying up in the clinch, he would cover up and just get murked to the body. When he was throwing his 1-2s, he wasn't doing it like with feints or a tricky rhythm. He was just kind of throwing it, and Rodtang would easily slip outside and batter him on the counter. So yeah, that's a great example to use in regards to how Thais are just tend to be tighter than international fighters. Now, in regards to the scoring, we've talked about how Muay Thai has a hierarchy of techniques, and the scoring is somewhat narrative based. But a lot of people get the impression that this means the decisions are often weird and bad. And sometimes you will see like a guy get boxed up but lose because his opponent landed less significant, what we would perceive as less significant kicks. But I find that usually the decisions actually make sense. And I would say that just watching and looking for who's landing the more effective strikes, I think Muay Thai is generally better about this than MMA, where you can kind of just tell who's winning by looking at who's landing the better strikes.
You sometimes see a weird decision that might be, there's rumblings of it being gambling influence or whatever, but I think it's a cultural thing. Whereas, I mean, if you look anywhere from the judging down to the referees in stadium Muay Thai, when we say stadium Muay Thai, just for the uninitiated, we mean Rajadamnern and Lumpini stadiums in Bangkok, as well as Channel 7 and Omnoi and all the main stadiums in Bangkok. But in particular, Rajadamnern and Lumpini. I mean, the judges there they know the fights, they know how they're supposed to go off by. It's a cultural thing. But you see how the referees are sort of amongst combat sports fans.
The referees are
hardcore
amazing.
fans are renowned as the best referees in the world. I was underneath.
Sorry, I think you're dropping out there.
The canvas, a double concussion is one of the most dangerous things going. So if a fighter gets dropped heavily to the face, they'll jump underneath them as quickly as possible, and their reflexes are excellent. And I think that's reflected in the judging as well. All round officiating is generally really, really good. We do get some bizarre instances of controversy, but I mean, I can think of some bad decisions, but I can also think of some decisions that were called bad, but actually, like you say, were completely understandable. I mean, there might be a fight where it's completely dominated, and then for 1 minute of the fourth round, the clinch fighter gets the upper hand and drops in some heavy knees to the body, and they end up winning the whole fight. Now, I can see why someone might say, hold on a minute, he lost, 9.5 minutes, 8 minutes of that fight and only won a minute and a half. But if you do go on the basis that the fourth round is the most important, and knees are very highly scored, then you can kind of just about see why it happened. I mean, I think any scoring controversy that I might have seen, usually, this is again not 100%, but usually comes from Western bias and Western misunderstanding of Muay Thai. Would you say that's fair?
I would agree. There is some concern with gambling and how that plays in, but I would agree that generally when people don't understand like why someone lost a decision, it's often from not understanding the scoring rule set and meta of Muay Thai. Um, yeah, I would say the scoring is usually pretty tight, and like you said, the officials are great. Like the refs, there's no better refs than Muay Thai refs. They'll dive underneath people getting KO'd. They will they'll be able to tell like if someone's throwing a fight and just stop the fight in the middle of it because they recognize that one guy is like getting paid off to lose. I think that
Also,
happened
really
in
good at stopping a fight if one fighter is outclassed.
yeah, if you see someone getting like collar tied and kneed over and over again to the body, if you take like 5 clean knees in a row, they'll probably stop the fight just because they know if a Thai is getting beat up that badly with knees, it's probably over. They're not going to be able to do anything.
I think
Yeah, in terms
generally,
of score,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
mean, it's an incredible fight scene once you get past those what should we say, cultural idiosyncrasies. You know what I mean? It's once you get past that, once you start enjoying sort of the metagame, so to speak, and start realizing, you start picking up on what styles you like, which stylistic ticks you like, and then eventually you look past these somewhat unpronounceable names and you start rooting for fighters that you like and following their careers and realizing you see them fight week in, week out. Um, someone like me who's like Senchai for, I didn't get into Muay Thai probably until sort of probably late 2000s, first decade. You know what I mean? Like, and definitely from sort of 2009 onwards. So we're talking 10, 11 years now. I think it must have been 10 years since I first went to Thailand. Yeah, it's got to be, or at least coming up to it. There's fighters that I watched then, like Senchai, and I never would have thought that they'd still be fighting now. For Thai
Yeah,
fighters, usually they're done by their mid 20s at best because they've been fighting since they were kids. They've had 300 professional fights, and someone like Senchai still fighting now. It's amazing to see. It really is. It's brilliant. You don't get to see that too often, but you might watch a guy from. I mean, I watched Jovica when I think he was 15 years old, or maybe just 16 against Singdam. Um, I got to watch him in person within a month or so,
oh
or
wow.
2 months. He'd beaten Senchai, and he was probably the pound for pound number one in the sport at 16, 17 years old. It really, you if you've got an appreciation for combat sports, then you've got no excuse not to watch or appreciate Muay Thai. I think it used to be a lot easier to watch. I think when Timo Ruga was running Muay Thais every Thursday and Friday, you would get every fight in HD from every main stadium fight. And people were still posting the Omnoy and Channel 7 fights, if you wanted to watch the prospects. But you could always watch all the main stadium fights every single week in beautiful HD clarity with a very old school boxing style shooting style where you could actually see the whole fight and everything that was going on. I think it's a little bit difficult nowadays to get it in HD quality, but if you want to watch these fights, they're still easily accessible. And it's the one good thing about one championship is that now people outside of you and I, Ryan, know who Rodtang is and they know who
Yeah, that's
Sam A
true.
is, and it's not just the Senchai show anymore. People are starting to realise that there's a bigger world, not just outside of Senchai and Buakaw, the big famous Thai guys, mainly because Senchai is just a living meme. And Buakaw obviously was really big in the international scene in K1 and
Right.
whatever. But there's also a huge scene outside the J kick scene. I mean, the Japanese scene is again sort of memeable, and there's a lot of people that love Japanese fighting, like you and I do. But that's why I think the sort of J kick scene is so much bigger than the Muay Thai scene. But the real big, the real great fights are happening week in, week out in Thailand, and you can see them. You've just got a little bit of understanding of the rules. I mean, even I don't know if you'd agree with this, but you can dismiss the rules and just watch them as fights and just watch them
Oh
for
yeah,
technique.
absolutely. You
Would you
brought
say
up a
that's
couple
fair? I
things that I
mean,
probably should have gone over earlier. Sorry, was there more there?
No, go ahead.
But okay, you brought up a few things that I probably should have gone over earlier. First was just the names. So when you hear like Rodtang Jitmoingdong, the first name of a Thai fighter is usually like some kind of nickname. So Rodtang is probably not his real name. I don't know what it means because I don't speak Thai, but it's a moniker. And then the last name would be their gym name. So Jitmoingdong is the gym he trains at. A lot of fighters are like Tawanchai, PK Chai Muay Thai Gym. So Tawanchai of Chai's gym. So we don't get their real names when they're announced. They're a moniker first and then a gym name last. And the second was the aging curve of Thai fighters. So like you said, Thais burn out really quickly. By the time they're like 23, 24, they're usually pretty shot because they start fighting when they're like 3 years old basically. And they fight once, twice a week for a long time. So they have so many fights in such a short amount of time. And fighting doesn't work by age necessarily. Like there's no age where you're suddenly shot, and there's no age where you're in your prime. Fighting tends to go by longevity curves more than anything. Like in MMA, we'll see fighters usually have about 10 good years before they start declining, regardless of how old they were when they started. And since Thai fighters start very young, they tend to be shot much earlier than other fighters.
Interesting thing, which you might agree with, is that I find that it's also the age curve, the age/prime curve is not just dependent on the age of a fighter, but also on the style. Like I find that clinch fighters are at their best at their youngest because they're able to cut more weight. They haven't got their full man body yet, and they're able to cut a lot of weight and thus be larger framed. I mean, the lankier a clinch fighter is, the more dangerous he is, essentially. So you would get someone like Jovic, who was probably cutting a huge amount of weight to make 135 or 132, essentially 135, what he was fighting at back then. Now I think he fights a lot, maybe 154 or 147 on the international scene, and it's kind of strangely compensated for his. Well, don't get me wrong, in terms of international fighters, he still bullies them in the clinch, but to compensate for that, he's now sort of developed a punching game that a boxing game that he never needed in his prime because he would just outman people by being too huge. You know, and again, like it's not just the clinching game. People think unless you've got a double collar tie on someone, you're smashing knees into them like Anderson Silva and Rich Franklin. That you're not winning the clinch. Whereas clinch manipulation and knees to the side of the body in Muay Thai are, like you said earlier, if you can do that to a top level Thai, you're controlling the fight. I mean, it's very, very difficult to dominate the clinch with a top Thai. If you are absolutely dominating the clinch, the fight would almost certainly be called off. But even working in the clinch, if you see a Thai guy who's a female fighter, who's like a technical fighter, maybe uses kicks, punches, a bit of everything, and he will also be very adept in the clinch, even if it is not his primary tool in the ring. He will be adept in the clinch. The clinch training over in Thailand is so intense, and they do it every single day, pretty much. You know what I mean? And just it's a grueling part of the training. There is no chance that anyone who gets to the top level of Bangkok stadiums would not be adept in the clinch. So even for a clinch master that gets a good clinch work done against a non-clinch orientated fighter, they're doing it against someone who's good at the clinch. So you need to respect that. Someone might say, "Oh, he's supposed to be a clinch monster," and he landed a couple of cuffing knees to the body there. That's difficult. That's an art in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said about FAMU fighters still being good in the clinch is a very important point. A lot of FAMU strategy kind of relies on the clinch. When you're fighting a really aggressive pressure fighter who's looking to close the gap and just like knee you into oblivion, it's really important to be able to close distance on your own terms. So if you watch outfighters like Runkid or Tawanchai, what they'll do, they'll strategically use the clinch in order to create space. They don't want long clinch exchanges. They're not going to beat fighters like Yadkin Pong or Chujaron in those really long, in-depth clinch exchanges. But if you watch Tawanchai's recent fight against Chujaron, what he would do When he backed up to the ropes, he would enter the clinch on his own terms and get dominant position, control inside the biceps or on the neck, and then he'd use it to turn out so his back is facing the ropes and then disengage. So as soon as Chujarones pressured him to the ropes, he would clinch, turn, and break to immediately get that space. And then the pressure fighter has to cover all that distance again to get him back to the ropes and get him in the clinch again. And then Townchai can do it again. So whether you're the kind of fighter who wants to charge forward and swarm and overwhelm people in the clinch, or the kind of fighter who wants to create distance, you still need to be adept in the clinch. You can't fight in Thailand without being able to navigate the clinch.
Of course, from a boxing standpoint, are there any boxing fans listening to this that want to sort of maybe give Muay Thai a go, that are sick of not seeing the big fights made in boxing and want to watch a sport where they get made week in, week out? That little stylistic matchup that Ryan just described there, it's no different to what Mayweather used to do. If someone was trying to pressure him, back up to the ropes, let him come onto him, maybe feint, pivot out, regain center ring, because then of course that, in order to reset, what you end up doing is you reset where you want to be, and that guy, your opponent, has to completely get reset in order to get back to where they need to be. And that's basically that. And again, you can't do that unless you know what you're doing. Floyd Mayweather wouldn't be able to do that if he wasn't comfortable enough knowing, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm adept enough on the inside. And talk about clinch games, Floyd Mayweather did have a really good clinch game anyway.
Oh,
Excellent
yeah.
on the inside. And if we talk about Muay Thai, he was pretty damn good at using his elbows as well. So, you've got Muay Thai. It really is important to be experienced in all facets of the game. To do not be fooled if you see someone that seems one-dimensional. They may only be using that dimension because that's the best part of their game, but they would not have got there if they didn't have other aspects to their game. And I think usually you see that come out against international fighters. If you see them, maybe open up a bit more if they're fighting on the international circuit. I mean, and that's often why you'll see. We used Yadkin as an example earlier. You'll see guys on an international scene where it's not full Thai rules, and they're still really good, because someone like Yadkin shouldn't be able to really compete in a rule set where he's not allowed to use his clinch, and yet he can, because there's so much more to him than just clinch work.
Yeah, absolutely. Ties tend to, you always hear MMA fans talking about how like ties are stuck in the mud, the Conor McGregor quote, and how they don't have very good boxing. But ties, if you look at like who has been successful transitioning to boxing, of all the non-boxing strikers, ties overwhelmingly have the most success in boxing. They've had genuinely great boxing champs in Veerfall and Samar, and I'm sure there's Chachai too, right?
The best one would have been, if anyone's listening who's heard of Vasily Lomachenko, he's only equalled the record of Sansak Mansurin, who won the
Yes.
WBC title in only his third fight in I think 1976 or 77. He won, and that point it was only a 2-bout system, so essentially he was one half of the world champion in only his third professional fight. He transitioned from Muay Thai to amateur boxing very quickly, just as a little warm up. Won gold at the Asian Games, just battering people. Took on a top 10 ranked lightweight, Rudy Barrow, in his very first fight. His debut professional boxing match, took on a top 10 ranked lightweight, and then in the second fight faced Lion Furiyama, who was the former challenger of the WBA light welterweight title, and he beat him in his second pro fight, and then in his first fight he won the WBC light welterweight championship. So I mean, and like you said, Virapon and Samat Payakaran, and Sagat Pechindi as well. He fought for a world title against Wilfredo Gomez very early in his career. Chachai Sasakal, who was a Muay Thai guy, but also fought at the Olympics as a amateur boxer. Ponsaklek Wonjonkam, he was a Muay Thai guy. Not a lot of people actually know that, but he was very, very, very good at Muay Thai. And even recently, we saw Kawaguchi the Ring Magazine light flyweight championship, defended his title against Satanmunlek. So even now, it's less common now. I think there's, with one championship doing Muay Thai now, with Rise, and all these other organisations and MMA out there, the amount of top Nak Muay Thai moving over to boxing is not as much, because there are now other opportunities for them to make money.
The level of boxing in Muay Thai has gone down quite a bit too, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Yeah, sure. But you know, like we said earlier, there's always that they can still box. That this whole idea that they're stuck in the mud, that they stand up straight, that they come in straight lines. You know, it's never been true, and it's not true now. But yeah, certainly there are less people transition over to boxing, be it for cultural reasons, for the sheer fact that there are more opportunities out there for these guys to fight in their own discipline. But throughout history, I mean, since Thais have put on gloves, and since boxing was taken over to Thailand, they've been coming over. They tried desperately to get a world champion. They desperately tried to get a world champion until they finally had one, and they've had many world champions in boxing ever since.
Yeah. So, like you said, if you look at Thais transitioning to international kickboxing, they're more than equipped to compete. They need an adjustment period, and like you saw with Tao and Chai, he went over to Wulin Fei, I think it was, and he won his first two fights. There were some shaky moments, and then he got kind of banged out by a Sanda guy who just threw hands at him in the pocket, and he wasn't really prepared to defend like long in-depth punching exchanges without using his clinch. But once they have more experience and make the adjustment, you get Thais like Siddhachai and Pech Panamrung, who are among the soundest strikers and the best boxers in kickboxing.
Sometimes it's not even the very, very, very top Thais that are really good at kickboxing. I mean, there's always the idea that Burkow might have won a stadium title if he had stuck around, but you know, he fit more of a look than anything else when he got taken over to Japan. He looked like the prototypical Thai destroyer. I think he was Omnoi champ, so it's not like he was a complete scrub. But you know, can you imagine what would have been like if? I mean, not that they did it, but there is footage of guys like Samar and Sagat and these guys fighting in say American kickboxing rules or something like that. But we're seeing it now, and I think we would have seen it before. I think, can you imagine what it would have been like if K1 was around in the peak of Samat Prakarun? I think he would have been as big a star as Burkow. Do you know what I mean? Internationally, certainly Samat is one of the biggest stars domestically, along with Burkow. There's not many. People probably don't realise this, but there's not actually many huge household names in Thailand when it comes to Muay Thai. Even though it's a national sport, it's very much a sport which is dominated by male fans, older male fans usually, not so much the younger kids even. If they're not fighting, they're not usually involved, but men of a certain age, in some places until very recently, women weren't allowed anywhere near the ring. It's changing now, you know, at last. But there's only a few fighters in Muay Thai that are genuinely like household names, and it's because they do other things like acting, like commercials, like have pop careers, and that would be Samat Prakarun, Burkow, Kalsai Galaxy, the great super flyweight boxing champ, and Somlak Kamsing, who obviously was famously an amazing Nak Muay Thai, but was mainly crossed over once he became the Olympic gold medalist for amateur boxing. Again, sorry to go off on a tangent here, but you've obviously watched a lot of Somlak like I have. Watching him, would you ever think that his style would translate to being the gold medalist in amateur boxing?
I mean, he has like the crazy defense, which is something I would expect to translate really well to boxing. But he does a lot of Muay Thai specific shit, like spinning elbows and everything like that.
Very rarely did you see him like generally just like boxing his way through a fight, and yet he had it within him to win a gold medal in amateur boxing. Very sadly, we didn't get to see him fight. I mean, I'd love to say that I set this up, but I didn't. I was talking about Floyd Mayweather a minute ago, and obviously Mayweather was robbed or at least lost a questionable decision against the Bulgarian Todorov the 96 games. And if he had won that decision, he would have faced Somluck in the final. So we are actually robbed of having an actual Mayweather Muay Thai crossover, which would have worked perfectly for this podcast. But oh
Yeah.
well, it just seemed I threw his name out there just as an example when it seems that there is a kind of six degrees of Kevin Bacon between Muay Thai legends and Floyd Mayweather anyway. So, but yeah, back to your point about international competition and Toe and Chai. Obviously, you were very upset when he lost. I was just
Yes, that made me very sad.
catatonic, stunned.
Yeah, Talon Chai, this is his first foray into international kickboxing, and he doesn't have the, like, when you see guys like Pitch Panamrong, Buaka, usually they start out with lower level competition, and I mean, I think Talon Chai kind of did. Like, I'm not familiar with a guy who beat him. He has a couple names on his record, but, so yeah, you would want to see them get more acclimated to the meta first before they start trying to take on, like, big hitters. But sometimes they need to just get thrown into the deep end and sink or swim. If he keeps going on the international route, I think he has the skill set to develop the tools needed to mitigate those kind of exchanges that are dangerous for him. But at the same time, sometimes you see ties who like flip back and forth between international and stadium fights when they get older. And then those ones tend to do less well in international styles because it's quite a different game. And even though Thais generally have the skill set to excel in kickboxing, it's hard for them. It can be hard for them to go back and forth, and it can be hard for them to excel in kickboxing if they're not really prepared to fight in the style. You saw Yadkin taking on Takeru, and he just got smashed because I don't think he has much international experience. And in Thailand, he's primarily a clincher. So the fight was taking away his primary skill set, and Takeru just killed him.
I mean,
But
we've seen multiple Thai guys get smashed by tension as well. Some because they're too
yes,
small or too old. Some because the styles just don't match. You know, and we probably need to do a separate podcast on this. And we spoke about doing an article, I and Lucas Bourdon. But the gap is shortening between international fighters and Thai guys. Whereas 10,
yeah,
15 years ago, you could probably put a Thai guy with one, just tell a Thai guy you can't use your elbows, and they would still smash international fighters. I mean, we see back in the old K1 days with smaller Thais fighting heavyweights and doing absolutely, fine. Even if they weren't winning championships, they were still doing really well. Do you know what I mean? Because the
yeah,
lack of technique with international fighters was enough of a boundary that if they were significantly heavier, it still would be a fair fight because the technique. We see it now with Senchai. Senchai is small and old and probably should be past his best, and has given up a couple of maybe 5 to 10 kilos to guys and still smashing them to pieces because his technique is just unparalleled. But yeah, the gap is getting shorter, albeit it may be due to more ties, like we said earlier, having getting into more international rules and thus being out of their depth. It may be to international fighters closing the gap themselves with more sharing of techniques and training and actually more experience. We're now seeing a lot more lighter weight fighters from international scenes, whereas certainly 20, 30 years ago, you really saw the sort of heavy middleweights to heavyweights. Nowadays, the lower weight scene of international kickboxing is as strong as, well, maybe not as strong as the ties. There's a lot of tiny ties that are fighting week in, week out, but certainly some of the more notable names. I would say in kickboxing now, international kickboxing, you're probably the same as me. You're way more interested in the smaller guys than the bigger guys. Whereas when I was a kid,
oh yeah,
we all wanted to watch guys like Ernesto Hoost and Remy Bonyaski and Peter Ertz and all these guys. And I'm not taking anything away from them. I still love all those guys, but those were the big names when I was a kid. And obviously, I'm significantly older than you, but they were the big names when I was a kid. And now I want to see Takeru and Tenshin and all these guys fight because just as the skill gap is so much bigger between the smaller guys and the bigger guys, now we've got the talent down there as well. Or certainly the talent is easier to gain access to than it was before.
Yeah, for sure. So on the topic of Thais versus international styles, I want to talk a little bit about the meta of Muay Thai and get at what separates it from these international styles we're talking about. So in Thailand, obviously the meta is heavily influenced by the scoring. So kicks on the arms score in Thailand, whereas they don't in kickboxing, which means that Thais generally put a lot more emphasis on both landing and defending kicks. So you
Quite
won't
funny
see.
actually. Just as quick aside, the fact that they don't score is insane because you're right. International is seen as you block a kick if you take it on the arms. You, like me, know if you take a kick on the arms, especially from a tie, which I don't think I really have experience. If you do take a kick on the arms, you don't come away thinking you blocked the kick.
Oh no, absolutely not. It's weird because sometimes, like, if the guy is not a strong kicker, you'll take a kick in the arms and it'll be nothing. Like, you'll be happy to return a kick in order to block a kick with your forearms. But when you take one from someone who can kick, and anyone fighting in stadiums can kick, it does absolutely not feel like you blocked the kick. You saw Sangman's fight against that Japanese lad.
Oh my
I forget
god.
his name, but
Yeah,
there was
but
a
the
picture of his
the bruises look
forearms.
like he'd been run over. It looked like he'd been run over
Yeah,
by a car.
it was nasty. So yeah, if you're taking kicks on the forearms by ties, you're getting fucked up. And we've seen many times ties stop opponents by just smashing their shins into the forearms. Yad Sankla has done that a bunch of times. Anyone who's fought lower level international competition has just kicked a dude in the forearms until he died. So yeah, they put a lot more emphasis into defending kicks, and they try not to take it on the forearms if possible. So they tend to fight with a much lighter lead leg. You'll often see Thais lifting up their lead legs or their rear legs to defend the kicks. When they go to the body, it's much more beneficial both from a scoring standpoint and from a like not getting your arms fucked up standpoint to lift your leg up and defend the kicks, even if it sacrifices a bit of mobility. And this light lead leg style plays into their kicking game too. Most fighters are orthodox, so you get a lot of orthodox versus orthodox matchups. And since the open side kicks are scored higher, kicks to the rear side, when you're standing in orthodox, your right side is open to kicks, whereas your left side is closed off by your back. So you'll see a lot of Thai fighters focusing on lead leg switch kicks, which is something you see a lot less of in pretty much anything aside from Muay Thai. MMA and kickboxing are less, it's a less common attack. And the light lead leg plays into that. They throw a lot of teeps too, in order to maintain their distance. And the clinch game is what really separates Muay Thai from other arts. You hear MMA fans talking about the Muay Thai clinch, and what they're talking about is the double collar tie, where you grab the neck with both hands and you like try to drag their face into knees. In high level Muay Thai, you don't see knees to the face, hardly ever. You'll see the occasional jumping knee, but you don't break an elite Thai's posture. It doesn't really work like that. If you hold them in double collar tie and try to drag them down into knees, you'll probably start doing pull-ups on their neck before you actually start making them bend down. Unless assuming you're like below 145 pounds, because most Thais are. But so you don't see knees to the head very often. Knees. So the clinch metagame is far more concentrated around landing to the body. Clinching is very upright, and you don't see level changes much because again, the knees are such a big threat. They don't use the double collar tie too much because it's considered an easy to defend position. Tie locks tend to look like you have one arm wrapped fully around the neck with your elbow kind of near the back of their head, and then it'll lock up with the other hand, wrist on wrist, with the opposite forearm pressed into their collarbone. And when they're in this, when they have the head cinched up like this, they'll look down and dig their forehead into the opponent's chin. It creates a really tight lock that's hard to break, and it gives you great control, allowing you to turn the opponent, lead him into knees, sweep if he tries to lift his leg up himself. And you'll see a lot of them work with underhooks too. In the modern, you see more underhooks nowadays than you did in like the 80s and 90s. It's more of a stalling move, but occasionally you'll see guys press their opponents to the ropes and kind of land those side knees to the body with underhooks. And the clinch in general is a lot more stally than it was earlier. You used to see very long clinch exchanges, but nowadays fighters will try to get a lock quickly, and then you'll usually see the ref come and break it up within a couple seconds. So yeah, do you have anything to add about the meta?
Yeah, I mean, you've raised. I was going to jump in, but you've raised one of the points I was going to say. When you talk about the double collar tie and its use in Muay Thai, it's a risky proposition to try and grab hold of one and try and throw knees to the head, like you say, because a lot of people realise you don't just grab hold of someone's head, and it is the head. It's not just people think it's right at the back of the neck. It's more, to the rear and to the back of the head.
Yeah, like the crown
Control
of
the
the
head. You control the head. You control the position in the fight, as is true for grappling and in all of its forms. But you like you say, you grab, if you do manage to grab a full-blooded Muay Thai clinch, so to speak, the opponent is going to be digging his elbows into your biceps. Is going to be fighting for position, and also, of course, you run the risk of being swept yourself. It's all good trying to throw a knee to someone's head, but when you've lost the round because he swept you to the floor or tripped you down because you took yourself off balance, it's oftentimes not even the case of not being able to do it. It's just not worth it. It's a high risk move.
Right.
And Muay Thai is about minimizing risk and maximizing control. That's what most of the time. That's what it is. It's about minimizing risk and maximizing you asserting your control over the fight. But yeah, generally, I think you covered all bases. One thing I will say, to jump back a little bit, is basically everything we've discussed as being true about Muay Thai is completely dispelled by the recent unearthing of the Samart Payakarin versus Diesel knife fight, which they go
Yeah.
hard from round 1 to round 5. There's long stretches of Samart being brutalised in the clinch and not being able to escape, the referee doing nothing about it. They fight literally to try and take each other's heads off right down to the last seconds of the fight. I mean, you discussed a lot about the meta game and in that generally about Muay Thai in that article. But I think if people want to sort of watch a fight which encompasses everything we're talking about, whilst also breaking a lot of the rules we're talking about, I think if I was going to introduce someone to Muay Thai, I think that might be the fight I use. Is there a fight
Yeah.
you can think off the top of your head that you might? I mean, don't get me wrong, that was an amazing fight. Probably still off. To a lot of people don't know, this fight was never supposed to be seen. We've been searching for footage for years. I've had a guy in Bangkok who's been trying to find it for years, has never found it. Then one day it just turned up on YouTube, and
I
it
think
was
you're right that
everything
that's
we
the
wanted and more.
yeah. More than anything, I think I'd recommend that fight to someone trying to get into Muay Thai. Like you said, it's everything. It has everything you would want. It's the traditional style matchup of the Muay Cow against the Muay Famir, the Swarmer against an Outfighter. Usually I recommend Lamnamoon Source Sumali against Karahat, like a devastating clincher against a guy who elbows everyone's face off. But yeah, since that fight came to light, I think like a couple months ago, I think that is the absolute number one fight you need to watch. And like you said, Diesel Noy is interesting because he has the kind of body structure that lets him use that double collar tie without making it risky. He has like freakish alien proportions, so he can just grab the back of your head and crank down, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I explained kind of the technique behind his clinch a little bit more in my article, but suffice it to say that he's what, like a 6'2" fighter that fought Samart at 127.
I think Samart was allowed to weigh in at 131, and I think Diesel had to make like 129 or something like that, which is insane. He
Yeah,
was struggling to
it's
make
ridiculous.
135 at that point, let alone. I mean, I think Sylvie, who uploaded the fight, said that when she spoke to Diesel, he's still affected to this day. And I know
Yeah,
from being friends with Diesel on Facebook a couple of years ago, he was in hospital with some health problems. I'm not sure if they're related to his kidneys, but a little aside as well is that one thing we haven't mentioned is that the Thais are still weighing in on the day of the fight, like old school boxing style.
Yeah.
International, say if Rodtang fights Takaru in K1, will he be weighing in the day before, like they do in MMA and boxing now?
I believe,
Do you
yeah,
know
they
that?
do the day before weigh-ins. They usually have like
Yeah.
a press
Whereas
conference, right?
I remember training with Sam and running with him, only briefly, mind you, because he was able to leave me for dust on the day of one of his fights, and he was
Oh
still
wow.
cutting weight on the day, and he looked very, very ill. I have the photograph somewhere, maybe on my Facebook, certainly not on my Insta. It's one I haven't been able to find for a while. I lost a lot of stuff on the last hard drive, as you know, because I lost a lot of my boxing footage as well. But I had record of me meeting Senchai and John Tong and some other guys. But there was a photo of me in Lumpini Park, me with a very, very red face, with my hair stuck to my scalp because I was sweating so badly, and somebody looking like he didn't have any sweat left in his body, wearing I think a Sijotong fucking sweatsuit, or sorry, a Pechindi Academy sweatsuit, and he looked drawn. And yeah, later on when I saw him that day, he looked absolutely fine, looked like himself again. He went from looking like a 45-year-old man to a 25-year-old man in the space of a few glasses of water. But that day he looked very, very drawn indeed. And these guys, they cut. Like, and he's not a guy who's a weight bully either. Do you know what I mean? He's a small technical
Yeah.
fighter, a defensive specialist, if anything. And he looked like a corpse. These guys know they cut weight like nobody else. And because of that, they cut weight like nobody else. It's absolutely insane.
It's odd too, because like when you look at stadium fights, their fighters don't look they're not like heavily muscled. They don't look like MMA fighters. If you didn't see them with their shirt off and you didn't like know they were a fighter, you probably wouldn't suspect that they were a fighter. But
They look like
like you
old
said,
school.
they
They
cut
look
a
like
lot of
old
weight.
school boxers. They look like old school
Yeah.
boxers. When you see boxing from like 40s and prior, that's what they look like.
And that probably has something to do with fighting so often too, right?
Yeah, it might be.
Where
It
it's
might be.
not
I mean,
as
they're guys
beneficial
that
to
they're not
like
blowing up in weight. They haven't got a chance to pack on loads of muscle. They stay at what is essentially their natural fighting weight, and then just cut weight for the fights. I mean, another thing we need to mention as well is oftentimes they're not really fighting in weight divisions, so to speak. They're sort of like, in order to make the betting odds, they'll sort of make one guy give up an extra pound and let one guy weigh in a few pounds heavier. And it's
yeah.
all some kind of meta gambling game where, in order to make a fight more competitive and thus more viable I mean, what we need to say as well, that you generally don't see uncompetitive fights in the Bangkok stadiums. And if maybe the fight isn't amazing, they'll change the weight a little bit. The reason that Dizanoy had to lose the little extra weight is because obviously he was so much bigger than Samart. So they said, Samart, you put on weight, and Dizanoy has to lose a couple of pounds, because otherwise that's the only way to make it intriguing, of course, because otherwise Dizanoy
Right.
is likely to smash him, and no one wants to see that fight. And at that point, Dizanoy was desperate for opponents, so he's more than happy to give up those concessions. But yeah, I would recommend anyone who's got this far in the podcast and is not 100% certain about whether they want to get into Muay Thai. First watch the fight. Just watch it naked, clean. Just watch it. Not actually naked. I mean, with no prior knowledge.
If
Just
you
watch the
want,
fight.
nobody's gonna
Yeah, I
judge
mean,
you.
if you want, I mean, yeah, if you want, whatever floats your boat. But then read your article on it, because we were going to do a sort of round table, and after reading that, there was really no point. It was brilliant, especially for someone like myself who'd been waiting to see this fight for a very long time.
Mhm.
It really did. It wrapped a nice little bow around it. That's what I recommend. But little thing I like to say, Ryan, is how are you getting your fix nowadays? What YouTube channels are you following? How do you go about following the fights? Our friend Lucas Bourdon does a write up for Bloody Elbow, which I think was going to be weekly, but I'm not sure if it is now. How are you getting your fix? Do you just wait till you hear something notable's happened, or do you watch them? I used to watch every stadium fight week in, week out, but as I say, it's not viable for me anymore, just in terms of the accessibility of it on YouTube, and also just lifestyle changes. So, what's your routine? Do you recommend to listeners of this that they can dip their toe in the water when they want to, or do you suggest that they jump straight in at the deep end?
The easiest thing is to follow CM Fight News on Facebook. They usually have streams of the major events, and they'll have like shorter versions of the big fights each week. What I do is I go on Muay Thai 2000 and look at their schedule and then pick out the most important fights or fights that I saw were quick finishes. And if I
Still
can't
get the
find,
rankings. You can still get the rankings on there, right? The Raja and
yeah,
Lumpini rankings
their
on Muay Thai
rankings
2000.
are weird and not exactly right, and I think they're out of date, but they're a good tool just for like knowing who's important to watch and who matters. And if you go on SMMTV's YouTube page, they'll have like six to 7 minute highlights of all the fights of every fight that happens. So if you can't find it on CM Fight News' Facebook page, then you'll be able to find a shorter version on SMMTV. Sometimes the Rajadamnern channel's YouTube page will have full fights of the more important fights at Raja, but those are kind of inconsistent, and I don't know when or where or how they decide to upload those. For watching older fights, go on Luca Bourdon's YouTube page, and we'll link all these in the description when I write up my article for the podcast. But go on Luca Bourdon's YouTube page, and he has thousands of playlists for all like the Thai legends and everyone. Am I missing anything in terms of how to watch Muay Thai?
No, I think that sounds just about right. As I say, it's a shame that Timo Aruga doesn't do the Muay Thai's channel anymore. I mean, that channel's still on there, and
Yeah,
it's a great tool for watching fights from maybe 4 or 5 years ago in pristine quality. You can see a lot of the formative years and prime years of fighters that are still notable now. Guys like Muay Thai and Sangmini Sortiempo. Um, and the list goes on and on and on. You can see a lot of fantastic fights on there. So I definitely still would recommend using that as a resource. But yeah, I mean, if you want to watch the old guys, you know, Lucas's channel or anything like that, there's a Muay Thai scholar as well who does some fantastic highlight videos, and has done some excellent write-ups on his site as well. Yeah, I
very
think
technically focused highlight videos too. Like he'll have people doing he'll have a highlight video of like Nakmoy's using teeps in interesting ways or sweeps. They're not just like MMA highlights where they show people getting knocked out. So
Aaron
it's
who
a good
runs that
resource if
page.
you
I
want to
think I
learn
think
more.
Aaron who runs that page actually fought in Thailand. He hasn't fought in any of the big stadiums, but I think I know he was professional Nakmoi, but I think he has actually fought in Thailand as well. So Aaron's a great guy, and
Okay.
he knows his history and he knows his technique. So yeah, you are correct. But you can watch. I mean, it might be worth watching some of their videos as well because a little highlights great. You know, if you watch, say, I'm going to use this guy as an example because he's one of my favorite fighters is Hippie Singmani. If you watch 5 minutes highlights of him and think, oh my god, he's incredible, and then put his name into YouTube and watch full fights of his, you know, I always think it's good when you're getting into a sport or getting into any hobby really to just get a flavour of things, because then
Yeah,
you
for
sort of
sure.
getting your favourites, having someone to root for, whether it ends up you don't like them in the end or you realise you were wrong to be a fan of theirs, not because they've done anything questionable, just because you think, oh, actually, that's not. I thought that was really impressive, but now I've got into it, I've realised maybe somebody just scores flashy knockouts is not that impressive for an easy example. It's always good to have what's the I'm trying to. There's a certain sort of word I'm looking for. I'm struggling to find it, but it's good to have something to grab hold of just to start off with, and then work your way up. I mean, when I first got into Muay Thai, I really liked sort of warmongers, you know, guys that just got into tear ups, Arturo Gatti types, and
Mhm.
I liked back and forth wars. And now I tend to err towards defensive specialists and FIMU technical fighters, just guys that are all round dominant forces. Of course, I do like the odd monster, the odd destructive knockout artist, but that's the same as any combat sport. You know, you have your favourites, but you have exceptions to the rule as well. I'm just
Right,
glad
of
that
course.
I'm just glad that people are interested enough in Muay Thai now. It might be due to one championship. It might be due to Rodtang giving Tension such a tough fight the other year. But I think outside of our little bubble, Rodtang seems to be the big name now that everyone's sort of talking about, which is fantastic. I'm so glad about that. But hopefully people can use him as a springboard to see other excellent fighters, be it Sexan or any other guys he's fought in the stadiums, and other guys they fought in the stadiums and maybe get into the sport. But also not just because of that, but you and I have been sort of inundated with requests for Muay Thai coverage, which is great because, after your article and after the discussions we've had online, taking people down, I'm going to have an excellent little segue here. Taking people down for their shocking UFC-based Muay Thai analysis, people have got more and more intrigued about the actual Bangkok fight scene. And for me, I only cover combat sports. It's certainly not for the money. It's because I want to tell the stories of these amazing fighters and get their name out and make sure people respect them. And there's pretty much nowhere quite like Thailand when it comes to amazing fighters. And I can assure you, Segway Man coming right up here, no one is in Thailand, be it Senchai, Singdam, Somluk, or Samat Prakaran, have ever received a black sash or black belt in Muay Thai. And
that must mean they're not very good at it, right?
Muay Thai.
That they're not at the level of Thiago Santos.
They must be white belts. Yeah, they're obviously not good enough. They're obviously not good enough to get a black sash from a guy that has never been to Bangkok in his life.
Not good enough to outkick John Jones.
My point exactly. I don't think people realise that just as there's an incredible metagame in Bangkok Muay Thai, there's a massive difference between international kickboxing, full contact karate, Brazilian style, the Brazilian style being more akin to the Dutch style, which we know does work. I always call the Dutch style a power boxing style. It's a game built around a lot of punches and some hard low kicks mainly. It's a very basic style. Just as we saw, it kind of ties into that Tawan Chai thing we saw the other week, where someone who's willing to commit to a power boxing style will sometimes fluster a Thai because they're just able to get in someone's face, throw lots of punches, either not caring or unaware of the scoring, and sometimes it will work. Whereas a Thai might not do that because either that's just not their natural game, or they're trying to play the long game, or because of the quote unquote unwritten rules. It's more of a technical game. Big punches being thrown is not likely, especially when you might get elbowed, or you might know you can elbow someone. For someone like Ramon Dekkers, if he was in UFC now, he'd probably let's just say Ramon Dekkers, if he's in his prime now in the UFC, and let's just say hypothetically he has Jose Aldo's takedown defense, he'd be excellent. He'd be excellent.
Oh yeah.
But he'd also be called the best Muay Thai in MMA, Thai level Muay Thai, etc., etc., etc. When it's very much a Dutch kickboxing style. As you can tell, a lot of those guys weren't even that sort of clinch based, because it's not predicated around the clinch. It's very much a kickboxing style, boxing punctuated with kicks. Whereas
and they were often fighting smaller Thais too.
Yeah,
so the clinch was
everyone goes on about Coban being one of the all-time greats. He was naturally smaller, and he wasn't. I don't think he was really quite. I don't think he was stadium champion at that point either. So, excellent fighter all the same. But it's the same thing with Tenshin now. Tenshin destroyed Wan Chalong, who's a natural super flyweight, and even smaller than that. And is wow. I mean, when we talk about ring rust, the guy's had like 300 fights and was known as an aggressive fighter. As an all-action fighter for the last few years. He had, more miles on him than a 75 Delta. You know what I mean? It's seriously old fighter. And that Ruin Wrong, the former light flyweight champion. No, flyweight champion boxing. I should know this. And that was. Yeah, I think Amnat was flyweight champ. He beat Shimin Zhu. He was a Rajadamnern champion back in the day. He then became a amateur boxer after he lost his
he was in the Olympics, right?
Flyweight title in boxing in the Olympics, fighting as a lightweight, and got beat up, and then came back. I think he had 1 or 2 Muay Thai bouts against overmatched opposition, and then he fought Tenshin. So yeah, I mean, cutting all that weight to flyweight, he probably was close to like a 126 pounder, really. So size wise, Tenshin was not bullying someone, but he was so far past his best. This is even taken out the fact that in between his Muay Thai and boxing career, he'd done a long stretch in jail. You know what I mean? This guy had a lot of
Yeah.
miles on him, and people that act like, oh, he's smashed a top Thai, that's a former world champion. This is not how it works. We've seen what happens when the best international guys, come up against the best Thais. And although that gap is getting shorter, guys like Rodtang, if he had the takedown defense of Jose Aldo, he might be as great as Jose Aldo in MMA. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, that is fair for sure.
He would probably be just wrecking people in first, second round KOs every fight he has.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's not me
like
being
you
one
said,
of
the
these
Dutch
Thai
style.
purists.
Yeah, the Dutch style has had maybe not consistent success, but there's been certain Dutch fighters that have proven successful in like high level stadium Muay Thai, but it's not quite a consistent success. The fighters are more one offs. You have like you said, Ramon Deckers, um who is Rob Kamen. I don't think Kamen fought like high level ties in stadium fights, did he? I might be wrong.
And not in BKK, I don't think. Not as far as I
Right.
remember. Lucas would know more about Cayman. I mean, but
But
also we talk
there's
about Dutch as well. We completely failed to mention the French as well. The French were also highly prominent, and French Cameroon and French fighters are also highly prominent on the international scene.
yeah.
And Damien Alamos actually did win a stadium title as a French fighter, the 140-pound welterweight title. So it's not just the Dutch. I mean, even some of the Brazilian guys in MMA, there's almost a TKD kind of thing to some of their styles.
Oh yeah.
Barbosa, some of his
Brazilian
stuff
Muay
is
Thai
more,
is very steeped in Taekwondo.
yeah, a lot of Taekwondo stuff as well. So, I mean, you try Taekwondo stuff in Bangkok, and you're going to end up dumped on your ass every 2 seconds.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What I
And I'm
was
not one of
gonna
these.
say
I
there is
don't want to
that
become across as one of these Muay Thai purists that act like I've already conceded that the gap is getting smaller, but in like we said about the whole meta game of Thailand and Muay Thai, you come out with some weird shit, you're going to end up looking weird yourself. Do you know what I mean? There's a reason
yeah,
these techniques don't tend to be used. Obviously, we saw Singdam get laid out by
just
that. I
spinning
think it was a
kicked.
Russian. Was it a Russian guy? That was a spinning back kick,
I
wasn't it?
think he
So
got spinning kicked by Tiu Jingliang, but it might have been another one too. I think there was two of them, wasn't there?
I'm sure like a Russian guy blasted him. But it might not have been with a spinning back kick. I might be getting, like you say, I might be getting the two sort of
Or
mixed
there
up.
might have been two spinning back kicks.
But again, as well, that's because there isn't that when you can't close the gap and clinch up like you would do usually. And Singdam's well known as well past his best, but also well known as an excellent kicker, high kick especially, just absolutely superb, like a proper technician at range. But usually in an international fight, a shot old Thai could take solace in the fact that he could just close the distance and clinch the other guy up. And as far as I
Yeah,
know, they were just under KB rules, and he just got blasted. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure they were. But definitely, we are seeing the gap get shorter. So if you don't want to get into Muay Thai because you think, oh, it's just these unpronounceable ties and blah, 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 don't worry. There will soon be someone that looks like you that you can root for if that's the thing that people are hung up on.
oh yeah, for sure. And what we do see international competitors move into Muay Thai, but they tend to be unlike like the one-off Dutch fighters that'll come in and find success. They tend to adapt to the Thai style. Like Danny Bill had a very Thai style. He was very active with knees and sweeps, and there's some foreigners fighting now, like Rafi Bohic or Rafi Singpatong. I forget which camp he's with now,
And
but he
and young Daniel McGowan as well.
yes, they all fight in very Thai ways. They use elbows. Rafi is a very competent clincher, and he does the clinch the way Thais do it. He doesn't clinch like a Dutch or like a Frenchman because he's French, of course. But so we've talked a lot about Diesel Noy versus Samart, and we've brought up the 80s to 90s era a little bit. So before we wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about the Golden Age and how and why it was different from today. So the Golden Age in Muay Thai was a period between the late 70s and early 90s where it's generally agreed that the talent level of Muay Thai, the level of competition and everything was the best it's ever been. The fight purses were higher than they are now and before. The interest in Muay Thai was higher. So let's talk a little bit about why the Golden Age was so great and why Muay Thai has declined a little bit since then.
It's declined is I'm not necessarily sure as, but certainly in terms of the competitive, the level of competition back then, everyone was fighting very, very regularly. You had some very, very powerful people driving the sport, be them shady or be them military, or whether you think the military is shady, we'll leave that to another day or no day whatsoever. But generally, shady gangster types, or as it is now, oftentimes run by military types, as a lot is in Thailand anyway. But yeah, you mean you? I'm not quite sure how it happened, and the time frame you gave is the time frame that I take, which would be late 70s to sort of early 90s. But a lot of guys that I've spoken to, guys like Rob Cox, they kind of say 85 to sort of 92. They say maybe a little bit later than what you and I are. But again, I always say something. There's so much crossover. There's no problem widening the gap a little bit. But yeah, I mean, if you look back, you just see smaller guys taking on risks, fighting bigger fighters. They just didn't care. You see
Yeah,
multiple series. I mean, now the key number will be a 7-fight series. That's what you tend to see, a 7-fight series. You see great trilogies, great 5-fight trilogies, great 5-fight series, not trilogies, 7-fight series. You see lots of different, a lot of variety in styles. You see quite a lot of multi-weight, multi-stadium champions. Also, I don't know whether it's to do with the advent of more accessible television, but more bright and colourful characters, or maybe just due to the fact we haven't got footage of the older fights, or Thailand is becoming more of a wild place. We get some real crazy characters. I just think when you consider professional Muay Thai and when it started and when it became more structured, it kind of obviously started to be a structured sport a lot later than boxing did, but very much if you look at the amount of decades that passed from gloves, titles, weight classes, regimented weight classes, and defined competition, it follows very much the same path that boxing did. So by the time we get to the 80s, Muay Thai is very much in its sort of 1940s phase that boxing was, where everything just is a big boiling pot and it all happened at the same time. And I think Muay Thai was on television more rather than just being filmed. It was actually on television all the time. And I think everything happened perfectly at the right time. Colour TVs in Thailand being more commonplace, pop music, everything exploding at the right time. And you had this golden age of Muay Thai. Everyone was fighting each other, and everyone was having great fights. It just so happened that it's just one of those things where, what's the chances that John Lennon, George Harrison, Paul McCartney, and Ringo Starr would all be from the same place in the same period of time and all happen to meet each other and start writing music together. Just sometimes these things are unexplainable, but I'm sure someone else might be able to explain it more. But in terms of the cultural impact on the sport and why it blew up at that time, but certainly that is just, if you watch any of the fights on that time, you're almost guaranteed just an excellent contest.
yeah. The fights themselves seemed a lot more interesting to me back in that period. You have, first of all, you have a much greater stylistic variety. When we look at the biggest boxers in Muay Thai today, they tend to be guys like Rodtang and Kulabdam, who are very fun and great, but they're more come forward bangers, like the in the John Lineker mold, than really patient, sharpshooting boxers. But back in the golden age, you had guys like Virafal or Virapal, I don't know how to say that. We had guys like Virapal Boonlai, who was more of a kicker, but he could box his ass off too. But these guys, Chamok Patch, these guys would work in much more complex combinations, hitting the body, throwing lead uppercuts, working around the guard. Virafal he could do the pressure style like Rodtang and Kulabdam, or he could sit back and like slip outside punches and knock people out with counters. I think part of the reason I like watching Golden Age fight so much more is the small gloves. I haven't actually read anything on this about why it changed or even if it changed, but if you watch Golden Age fights, they're wearing the gloves they wear look much more like old school boxing gloves than modern day kickboxing gloves. I don't exactly know when it changed. I think it was probably around the early 2000s or late 90s, but they're wearing much smaller gloves, which facilitates easier clinching. And like I said about the clinch, when you watch great clinchers from the Golden Age, they don't tie up and then stall out the clinch and force the ref to break it. You'll often see like entire rounds of people just clinching back and forth. Nobody gets like double underhooks and stalls it out. They're constantly transitioning between collar ties and locks, turning their opponents and landing knees. If you watch any Lam Namoon Sumali fight, you'll see this a lot where the two guys are just clinching and transitioning over and over and over, and the ref never has to stop it and break the fight. I've heard one of the biggest reasons I've heard for why the rule set changed and why the Golden Age kind of ended was that the rule set became more structured towards gambling. So the clinch, the ref breaks up the clinch quicker. The fighters have more incentive to stall the clinch. But I've never really heard a thorough explanation for how or why that was. Just that the sport changed to facilitate more gambling.
It's the kind of thing that I've been told over the years and never quite managed to pin it down. Speaking of the clinch and knees landing, is there anything more exhilarating than hearing a whole stadium Muay Thai crowd chant "Hey" every time a knee is landed? It's especially in the Golden Age, just "Hey," and then someone else fires back "Hey," and it's all these people in unison understanding the sport. And you don't nowadays in like in MMA, like we spoke about this recently. If you watch the Demetrius Johnson Joseph Benavidez fight, Joe Rogan says that these people are actually booing. They're not understanding.
Yeah,
They're not cultured. It's the fans of Muay Thai generally understand their sport. They absolutely understand their sport. Um, and you see them cheering for stuff that might seem minute, especially if a big shot's landed though, and then one's fired back. It's kind of like a Mexican wave. They get right into it, and everyone starts sort of firing back and forth. It's absolutely superb. Other
yeah,
guys, again, I recommended Hippie earlier. Hippie Singmani, just amazing fire. Virapon is a guy you mentioned, and I agree. He's one of my favourite boxers of all time. Certainly one of my favourite Muay Thai fighters. I'd highly recommend his fights with Samson Isan, who became known as Samson
yes,
Dutch Boy Jim in boxing. They kind of went back and forth, knocking each other out with brutal punches, which is crazy, really, because Samson was known as a puncher, but also had incredible well-rounded technique. He was like an action fighter, similar to like Rod Tang now, but could do it all, and a massive star in his day. But the fact that he could knock Virapon out with punches and then Virapon knock him out with punches. I mean, it's the kind of thing you don't really see like multiple fights in a series, or if any nowadays, ending with knockout punches. It'd be like if Tawan Chai
yeah,
knocked Sangmani out of a punch and then Sangmani knocked him out of a punch a couple months later. It really is. I do recommend if a boxing fan is trying to get into Muay Thai to watch some of the more golden age fights. Get looks the kind of level of competition and the back and forth is something which is less alien to our eye back then. You'll see like Muay Thai techniques being pulled off like great boxing techniques, like I've told you before about the Hippie Singmani check elbow, which is eerily similar to Mayweather's check left hook that he hit on Ricky Hatton, but he does it with an elbow. I mean, it
yeah,
really is high level stuff. And obviously, of course, there are just the genius as well, like Samat Prakaroon, and now we have Diesel Knight in his prime, Chamuk Pet that they mentioned earlier, and guys like that. And there are some absolutely stunning fighters from that era, some of the greatest of all time. And yeah, if we should probably make a documentary or a little highlight video explaining the golden age, I think would be quite interesting. But
yeah. It's a good idea.
in order to do that, we need to get some firm answers from people as to why these things changed. But I do think it'd be very interesting if this conversation could
Hmm.
be seen as a palate cleanser before the main course. I'd be happy to do that. But I think we've covered quite a lot, and I think
In
go on.
in terms of our favorite fighters, I'll shout a few guys out. So Yadkin Pong, these are all Golden Age fighters, by the way, because of course all my favorite fighters are from that era. Yadkin Pong is a devastating elbow specialist. He could land. He usually come forward and pressure and land elbows when guys are on the ropes, but he could also land them on the counter. Lamdamoon Sorsumali, a really slick clincher, pretty good kicker at range. He had a tricky head kick, but he made his hay with knees in the clinch. Veerfall, which we've mentioned before, just an amazing, devastating boxer. His nickname was very appropriately, Death Mask. He had some of the most beautiful KOs I've seen in Muay Thai. Chamwok Pech, who I've mentioned before, is a knee specialist, but he had a unique style built around it. He wasn't like a typical Muay Cow where he'd come forward and tie up the hands and kind of look to clinch you and land the knees. He was a devastating pressure boxer, and he would use his boxing to enter into his knees, which is really something you don't see at all in Muay Thai anymore. The Muay Cows are very
He could also knee someone from like quite far away in a
yeah.
way that you wouldn't expect him to be able to do.
So he was a devastating puncher. He had an excellent lead uppercut that he would use to split guards open, and once he had guys on the ropes, he would just chop them up with knees. It's amazing to watch and something you don't see very much at all anymore. And I have to shout out Oleg Kiatanoe for our friend Luca Bordon, a super slick outfighter, defensive master, Saiyan Chai before there was Saiyan Chai.
Ole was something else, absolutely something else. But so many of these fighters of this sort of, like you mentioned Boonlai earlier, and fighters like that, that were just, you get a whole smorgasbord of styles, and one night one style might work, and one night another might, and then you get guys like Samart, Chamakpet, Somluk, Dieselnoy, who apparently were pretty much unbeatable whoever they faced, and that's why those guys are still seen as some of the greatest of all time now.
You really can't go wrong with anyone from that era.
You can, but generally, getting into the sport today is. I don't want. And you're not making this point, but I don't want anyone to think that we are saying that Muay Thai is shit nowadays. It's still excellent.
Absolutely not.
Still lots of excellent fighters, lots of different styles. It's a bit of a different vibe, a bit of a different atmosphere due to the scoring, and also like the golden age has got this kind of clearly like it's high tech stuff. There's also got this Wild West feel to it, be it the old grainy film or VHS passed down 10 generations, 3 generations, and now looking quite sort of seedy. It's got that kind of dark end underbelly of Bangkok feel to it, where people have grenades thrown at them at ringside and are assassinated in the stadiums. And that's not me using a metaphor or an analogy. That's actually true. That really was that era. Whereas now the stadiums are, Lumpini's moved from the old place to a new place, and they're very clean and very professional looking, and the fights look very much so as well. And it's Thailand is not a particularly affluent or rich place, but the fights certainly give the appearance. They're not as glitzy as their J kick counterparts, but certainly nowadays with the high def cameras we have and the shiny stadiums that they're using nowadays, it has a more kind of sterile feel to it. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's you don't get as much. It's not like the big scene that it was back then either. If you're watching Muay Thai now, you'll watch it on like a Facebook stream or on like some shitty low definition highlight video on YouTube. You don't get like the big feel. It's definitely more sterile.
Still definitely worth a watch. I can't recommend the sport enough. I still love it to this day. Not quite as deep into it as it was maybe 6-7 years ago, where I was watching every single fight every single week, but that's just because we've got a lot of options now. We've got a lot of stuff to cover and a lot of stuff to watch. If I was a millionaire and I didn't have to go to work anymore, I'd find time to watch absolutely everything. I'd watch, all the Alaska fights and MMA, and I'd watch regional MMA, and I'd watch Muay Thai every week, and I'd watch every kickboxing card going and every boxing card going. there's just not enough hours in the day. So I tend to sort of just keep up with the top Muay Thai guys nowadays. So if I can do that, there's no reason why our humble listeners can't do the same. You know what I mean? You can
Thais are
easily
still
fit.
the best strikers in the world, largely. So it's definitely
Absolutely.
worth watching the modern game.
Absolutely, and you can definitely fit it around your schedule. We're not saying you have to, you have to be fully versed on it and watch it every single day of the week. We're saying, just give it a go. Try and get in. Maybe just pick a favourite. No, I would say probably no one better to start with than our reigning combat sport athlete of the year, Sang Mini.
Sangmini. Over the last year, Sangmini's beat the best competition in Muay Thai by far. Tawanchai, in 2018, Tawanchai really burst onto the scene. He beat Kulabdom 3 times. He destroyed Nuances, who's another top fighter. And in the early part of 2019, he knocked Sangmini out with a head kick, just dominated him really. And then Sangmini came back. He beat Tawanchai in a rematch. He boxed him up. And then he beat Yadkin. I believe he beat Rafi and he beat Yod Panamrung. All very elite, great fighters. And avenging particularly his rematch with Tawanchai was just incredibly impressive. Sangmini is probably one of the best boxers in Muay Thai right now, but he can do everything. He's when he fights devastating pressure fighters like Muay Thai, he can play the outfighter, lead them around onto counters and finesse them. And then when he has to, when he's fighting a kicker like Tawanchai, he can pressure, get into their face, and box them up. He's, like Kyle said, probably the best one to watch right now. I'll shout out a few other modern fighters for our listeners. Probably my favorite fighter of the last 10 years is Liduwada. I think it Liduwada Sidikul. I'm not sure how to say that. Sorry?
Yeah, that's correct.
But yeah, okay. Liduwada is a really slick boxer. His biggest win was against Yodvicha, who Kyle was talking about before, who's, like he said, was a devastating clincher. And Liduwada just finessed him on the outside. He flashed a jab in his face, pivoted off. He has sort of Lomachenko footwork, where he'll do those shifting hop steps in the pocket that Lomachenko does. And it's really neat to see in Muay Thai. He took a few years off. He was having a shaky couple of years in, I think, 2017 and 2016. But recently he went off to amateur boxing. But he's come back. He's been scheduled to fight Nuances, I think in early February. So that's definitely one to keep an eye out for. Runkit I talked about Runkit boxing up and kicking up Rotting. He's sort of like Liduwada. He's a really slick outfighter, but he works a lot more with kicks and knees. In his last fight against Yadkin is basically the John Lineker of Muay Thai. He's a short guy who comes forward and destroys people's bodies, puts body head boxing combinations on them, and Runkit just kneed the absolute hell out of him, destroyed him in the clinch, boxed him up on the outside. It was amazing to watch. Who are some of your favorite modern fighters right now?
One of my favourite modern fighters, and it's a bit of not a sad tale, but kind of ties into what we were saying earlier. Certainly, the last sort of 10 years would be Superbank. Superbank was a free weight stadium champion, the master of the sweep, a very technical fighter. Left for a little while, I think, because he was a policeman. And now he's sort of on the international scene. He's not doing too great in the stadiums. Whereas maybe 6 years ago or so, he was not unbeatable, but he was so technical that he was very, very hard to beat. I think he was the fighter of the year at one stage as well, which is the journalist picking the fighter of the year is essentially the highest honour in Muay Thai. Obviously, the Thai fighter of the year is a massive honour because it goes to show that you've had an excellent year. And for guys that fight every couple of weeks, consistency over a year is highly impressive. So he's pretty much done now. But I just had a check, and which stunned me, is he's only 25 years old. I thought he was older than that, which goes to show, this guy he's pretty much done at the top level. And in any other sport, he'd just be about entering his physical prime, which is just insane, really. But yeah, Superbank, fantastic. The master of the sweep, I'd call him. Just incredible. I mean, outside of that, I mean, most of the guys we've already mentioned. I mean, I'm a huge Sangmani fan. I've been for years. And you talk about how bad his year was before he come back this year. This guy's had an up and down career. Bad year, good year, bad year, good year. Seemingly unbeatable. Seemingly can't win a fight. Just incredible amount of career packed into such a young age. I think he's only like 23, 24, Sangmani now. I mean, I don't think
Yeah, that sounds about right.
he's also
He was
much more
poisoned too,
handsome.
right?
Yeah, he was poisoned. He's also much more handsome than Tenshin. Everyone's going on that they want Rodtang Tenshin 2 or Takaru versus Tenshin. Give me Rodtang versus Takaru and give me Sangmani versus Tenshin. That's what I want to see.
I'd love to see
Sangmani versus
those.
Tenshin with a very handsome little fight going on there. As a heterosexual man whose girlfriend's probably listening to me now thinking, what the hell are you talking about? I'd be all kinds of handsome in that ring if those two boys fight, because Sangmani, like Samut before him, was a bit of a pin-up in Thailand. As I said earlier, it's a sport that's followed by a certain contingency of middle-aged men, but the girls love Sangmani. I'm sure some of the boys do too. So I think we've given them obviously one of my favourite fighters of all time. Is still active, not as active as he used to be. I think he's sort of fighting off and on at the stadiums nowadays. He come back to the stadiums not long ago. He's been fighting sort of in Bangkok, but not against the best guys, and he's just sort of coming back into his own again now, which is Tananchai. Tananchai is of the Rodtang mold. He's one of the best boxers in Muay Thai. He's a technical fighter, but he is known as a guy who's up for a war. If you put Fananchai into YouTube, you almost certainly see some excellent fights. He had a long series with Sangmani, and he fought absolute monsters like Seksan. He fought Pampayak. He fought basically everyone you can think of that were sort of top of the game in maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago. And yeah, basically, Fananchai for me is just one of my favourite fighters. He'll fight through anything, and strangely enough, he's another guy who's a really good boxer, a good technical boxer, and highly recommend getting into him. Might not be as relevant nowadays, but you know he's still sticking around, and just one of my favourite fighters, probably of all time in Muay Thai.
He's fighting Seksan, I think, on the 31st, right?
I don't know if he is fighting Seksan. Is that correct?
I think
Is
he
he
is.
fighting him again?
Yeah. And that January
Okay.
31st card is, if you're gonna watch anything in modern Muay Thai, watch that card on January 31st. There's a ton of top names there. Dananchai and Seksan are fighting. Runkit is fighting. I forget exactly who, but there's it's one of the most stacked cards I've seen in a long time. So definitely check that out.
Seksan and Fananchai is guaranteed to be absolute bedlam. I know we said that about the first Seksan Rodtang fight, but that was a rare occasion. It didn't live up to it. The second fight made up for that. But
yes.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what, if you guys want to get into Muay Thai, wait till the 31st, because I guarantee there's going to be some good fights on that card by the sounds of it. So, again, Tananchai and Seksan not in their primes anymore. So if you put their names into YouTube, and if you want to find out how those names are spelled, or if you want some fight recommendations, you always come to us on Twitter. I am at Polgas Boxeo, which is PULGASBOXEO. Ryan, how can they find you?
I'm Ryan A. Weg, MMA on Twitter. RYAN
For Alpha.
WAG, yes. MMA.
Or you can ask our site affiliation at fightsite.com, which is spout.com, fightsite, DOTCOM. And you can, if you can't find us due to our convoluted Twitter handles, you can always ask the official account of the fightsite.com and say, who are those two lovely guys I heard speaking about Muay Thai? But I'm almost certain if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already following us. But if you're not, give the site a follow.
All right. This has been great. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you for having me. We'll do it again, and hopefully soon. I'm not sure how many times you plan to do this podcast. Probably once every couple of weeks, or once a month, or once whenever there's something interesting. But it won't just be me. It'll be other people. I'll get some other people on, some kickboxing guys, some Muay Thai guys, and I know, Ryan, you'll be bringing in some excellent content.
For sure. I was originally planning to do to talk about the one fights and some of the stadium fights this week. After this ran on a little long, so I think I'll do 2 podcasts this week, and then try to get on a 2-week schedule.
Sounds good to me. Have you got anything coming up for the site that you want to tell everyone about? I mean, it doesn't have to be Muay Thai centered. Have you got anything that you're working on for the site?
Yeah, so for this year, we're aiming to make the fight site the premier spot for ACA coverage. If you haven't heard of ACA, then you probably haven't been following us on Twitter. But ACA is the most talent-rich non-UFC promotion in MMA, and every month we're going to be covering a different division. February is lightweight, and we're going to be talking about why ACA has 3 of the top 5 lightweights in MMA right now.
That is bold talk. You know, I love them ACA lightweights, but 3 of the top 5, I'm not sure I agree. I have to read that article and see if you can convince me. So that's coming up in February. I mean, you know, you've got me into those fights big time. I'm standing for Kudryov, which is crazy.
Yes, that is my goal.
You know, yeah, I'm a one of those disgusting left wing people, but I can't help but stand Kudryov for what he's. Well, I'll say what he's put together, what he's basically taken by force and business acquisition. But yeah, I mean, I'm loving those fights, and any more knowledge I can glean from you about those fighters, I'm very much looking forward to. I myself am working on a long form piece, which is still kind of you know about and some others know about, but I'm kind of keeping it under my hat, just in the instance that I don't manage to finish it in time for when I'm planning to release it, which will be the end of April, because my hypothetically, I think it's going to be about 120 to 150,000 words, and obviously not one piece, it'd be a series. And as anyone who followed the top 20 greatest MMA fighters of all time series we did, I am known for working at a glacial pace. So, you know, that's not through laziness, that's through wanting to be as comprehensive as possible. So I won't release the deets just yet.
Well, whatever it is, we're all very much looking forward to that. Everything Kyle writes is extremely thorough, extremely well researched, and brilliantly written. So whenever that does come out, I'm sure it'll be incredible.
Thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate that.
And I think we're good here. I'll let you guys go now. Thanks for joining
us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'll talk to you later.